In this video, we'll talk about Associated Press style rules for numbers. There we go. Entries covered in this video. The primary entry we'll be dealing with is the entry called numerals. It is a very large entry and it has a whole bunch of subsections, and it also refers to a number of related entries, and we're going to talk about some of those too. One of them is millions, billions, and trillions. This is foundational to understanding the general scheme for using numbers in AP style. We'll also talk about some special case rules for ages, percent and percentages, things dealing with measurements, so dimensions, distances, and weights. That's where you would have a number with a unit of measure. We'll talk about dollars and cents, and a couple of specific areas. So some of those subsections within the numerals entry that we want to cover are numbers at the start of a sentence and the use of ordinals, which we'll get to near the end of the video. Okay, when we talk about numerals, we need to first understand the general rule, and then we want to look at some instances where the general rule applies. Okay, so in the general, for the general rule, you're going to use words for the numbers 0 through 9. So think single digits. If it's a single digit number, don't use, as a general thing, don't use figures, use words. So, try that again there. Oh, we're going backwards. There we go. So you would write a word for 0. You would write a word for 5. You would write a word for 9. Any of those in that range, use words. Now, once we hit double digits, we're going to start using figures. So that works all the way up to a million. So you would write 10, 18, 50, even odd amounts like 947. Notice that once we get past 1,000, you start using that comma in there every 3 digits. 5,250 with a comma. Bigger, 25,960. Oops, I left a 0 off there. Pretend I didn't do that. Okay. So that works for those ranges of numbers. That gets us all the way up to a million. So once we get into the millions, billions, trillions, now we need to start using a mixture of figures and words. So just follow the examples below. So, one other thing, you want to round off the amounts to no more than 2 decimal places, unless there's some compelling reason that the exact amount needs to be made, but that's not usually the case. So if you needed to write a number like 2 million, we've got to notice that the number at the beginning, 2, so the general rule doesn't apply to the 2. We use a figure, okay? So it's a figure no matter what it is, 2 paired with the word million, okay? Same thing here, 12 million, a figure paired with a word. 6 billion, so they work the same way. If we need to give amounts that are in between billions, use a decimal, so 6.3 billion. Notice how we've done that, not 6.30 billion. The O is never necessary. If you need to go beyond the decimal point, you can go 2 places beyond. After that, you should start rounding the numbers off generally. So 65.57 billion, 15 trillion. So wrong, these are examples of wrong usage. Writing 2 million, if you spell out the word 2, TWO with million, that is incorrect according to Associated Press style. It would also be incorrect, again, as a general thing, to go past 2 decimal points. Again, context matters, and if there's something going on specifically in a story that for some reason you feel it's necessary to go that far, fine, but generally speaking, AP would say stop at 2 decimal places. Also wrong would be writing out the number just as figures. So writing 12 million in that manner with all the zeros would be incorrect. Okay, so the general rule, which we've just laid out, 0 through 9, 10 to less than a million, and then we get into the millions. That's the general scheme. So this is going to apply generally, right? So it's when there's no specific rule in the style book that tells you to do anything different, that's when the general rule applies. So some examples. The crash involved 5 cars, 2 motorcycles, and 15 people. Notice that we've got 5 spelled out as a word, 2 written out as a word, 15 as a figure. This is correct Associated Press style. 10 and above written as a figure, 0 through 9 written out as words. He has been president of the university for 8 years. 8, okay, EIGHT, spelled out, written out as a word. She has been the university's provost for 12 years. Now we've got a figure. Graduation is 127 days away. The town of about 4,000 people, notice we've said about and a round figure, and that's fine, but we've got the 4,000 written as a figure. Okay, so this is when it gets tricky. When does the general rule not apply? If there is a style book rule that gives you rules for specific usages, that's when you've got to do something different. So there's a bunch of them. In this video, I'm just going to cover some of the most basic, some of the most common ones, okay? So as a general thing, these exceptions that we're going to talk about almost always involve a rule that says use figures for everything, okay? I think you'll see what I mean. Usually there aren't a whole lot of rules I can think of off the top of my head where it would direct you to just use a word no matter what the number is. There is one, and it's kind of a weird one, and we're going to get to it at the end of the video. Also, there are some rules about the use of units and symbols in connection with the numbers, and we're going to talk about those in this video too. Okay, so the rules that we're talking about are some of the other ones that I listed on that first page: ages, percents, dimensions, distances, and weights, units of measure, dollars and cents. So let's dig into a few of these. On ages, use figures anytime you're talking about age. Okay, here's where it gets a little bit tricky if you overthink it. The general rule still applies if you're just talking about an amount, describing an amount of years. Okay, I realize that a lot of you may be scratching your heads wondering what the distinction is. I'm going to give you some examples, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about. These are all references to ages. Becky Smith is 6 years old. Notice we have that magic phrase, years old. Okay, 6 years old, that is describing her age. Becky Smith, a 6-year-old cyclist, won the event. Now it's part of an adjective, but describing a cyclist, but it's the same construction, same idea, 6-year-old, in that phrase, a 6-year-old. Jones and her 9-month-old son survived the crash. Now we're talking about months instead of years, but it's describing the age of a person. The president will honor Tristan Phillips, 7, and Jamal McDaniel, 9. So notice we didn't use the word years old or age 7 or age 9, but there is a specific understanding in English, and this is not an AP style thing, this is an everywhere thing, that when you have a name of a person and a comma and a number after it and another comma, the connotation there is that that's their age. It's not describing their height or anything else, their weight or anything else about them, it's their age. We see that and we just sort of understand it, okay? City council may repeal the 3-year-old law. Again, now it's not talking about the age of a person, but it's talking about the age of a thing, and it's using that year-old phrasing, okay? Those are all examples of ages. These are instances where the sentence is merely describing the number of years since it's been something that happened. We're not using that phrase years old or something along those lines. Becky Smith was born 6 years ago. Okay, we're just noting an amount of time. Jones's son was born 9 months ago. The city council enacted the law 3 years ago. Here we didn't call it a 3-year-old law. We said it was enacted 3 years ago. So I realize that might maybe seem a little confusing or a little counterintuitive, but it's the years old phrasing, okay? That's when AP considers it to be stating the age of something. And definitely in this type of construction where we just park a number right after somebody's name and you're supposed to recognize that it's an age, that's where you use figures for all of these. The general rule doesn't apply. Even if they're single digits, use figures, okay? I hope that's clear. And obviously, if we're in double digits, that uses figures as well, okay? I didn't give you any examples about 10 or 15 because the general rule applies to those. I mean, it's the same. It's figures for anything 10 and above as well. Okay, percents, percentage points. Use figures for all references to percentages, okay? So again, same idea as with ages. It's just the general rule doesn't apply. Use figures for everything. Also, AP now uses the percent symbol in combination with a number. So we don't write out the word percent in a story if there's a number with it. This is actually a change that went into the style book in 2019. The rule used to be the opposite in that regard. It said to spell out the word percent. The Federal Reserve lowered the discount rate to 5%. Notice we've got 5 written as a figure with the percent symbol. Tuition will increase 8.5% next year. Got a figure and a percent symbol. She received 57% of the vote. It would be wrong to write out the word percent according to current AP style guidance. Okay, pre-2019, that usage right here would have been correct. Tuition will increase 8.5% next year. Again, this would have used to be right, but now it's wrong. Same thing with percent. Okay, and notice that we've used figures everywhere. Dimensions, distances, and weights. I'm going to group these together because it's the same idea for all three. These are 3 separate entries in the style book. But the general rule does not apply when you're talking about units of measure of length, width, height, distance, or weight, which I should have added to this list. Also, so basically, when I say the general rule doesn't apply, it means use figures for everything. Okay. And don't abbreviate the unit. So you'll notice here, he missed a 3-foot putt. We've got foot spelled out F-O-O-T. It's not abbreviated F-T period. But the other thing I want you to notice here is that I've written 3 as a figure. The hole chewed by the squirrels was 2 inches wide. So even though 2 is one of those 0 through 9s, it's paired with a unit of measure. And notice inches is spelled out. It's not abbreviated IN period. The 8-yard touchdown run put the Bears ahead. Okay. Got 8 written as a figure. Yard is spelled out, not abbreviated YD. The construction covered a 5-mile stretch of Interstate 44. We got 5 and mile spelled out, not abbreviated. The baby weighed 9 pounds, 6 ounces. So here we have figures, pounds, and ounces. You'll notice we did not abbreviate pounds. It is not written LBS, which I've never understood why that's the abbreviation for pounds, but that's the case. But that's not, we don't use those abbreviations in AP style. The fire burned 5 square miles of timber. So even if we're talking about square measure rather than distance or length, then it's figures. Okay. Money amounts, use figures for all amounts of money. The dollar symbol needs to be used in front of the numbers. However, we don't use the cent symbol in AP style. It's actually rather difficult to type the cent symbol these days because it's not a symbol that's on computer keyboards, and usually you have to do a special character to get it to work. I had to Google how to do it to make the slide actually. So the candy bar costs $3. So you'll notice we've got a 3 written as a figure, and we've got a dollar sign there. The candy bar costs $3.50. So I gave you these examples because when it was $3, we just used the 3. I didn't put 3.00. So if it isn't an exact number of dollars, you don't use the 00 afterwards. You only go past the decimal point if there are cents attached to dollars, $3.50. Okay. In the 1990s, a newspaper usually cost 50 cents. So we've got this written as a figure and the word cents spelled out and after it. Notice also in these 2 examples, I didn't write the word dollars after. So one of the classic mistakes that people will make, sometimes just without really thinking about it, is they'll use the dollar sign correctly, but then they'll go ahead and write the word dollars after that. That is incorrect and redundant. Okay. General admission tickets are $15. Got a figure there. Notice the rule on millions, billions, and trillions applies the same way that it does in other numbers. So we use that mixture of words and figures with the dollar sign. Okay. So it would be incorrect to write this $3. If we write out the word dollars and omit the dollar sign, that is incorrect. That does not follow AP style. Candy bar costs $3. It's also incorrect if you have the dollar sign and the word dollars. That's repetitive, and it should be pretty clear why that doesn't make any sense. And we don't use the cent symbol, as I talked about. And it would be incorrect to use the decimal point and 2 zeros if it's an amount of money that's an exact number of dollars. Okay, those would all violate AP style. Oh, and it would also be incorrect with a money amount to write out the full figure rather than using that mixture of figures and words. So this would be incorrect usage in AP style to write the 4,500,000. Okay, at the start of a sentence, this is a special rule that I find kind of weird, but this is still the style book guidance. If you begin a sentence with a number, you're supposed to write it out as a word instead of using a figure. Okay. Following this rule can lead to some clunky usage. And so usually the best thing to do is to rewrite the sentence so that you don't have to start with a number. So it would be incorrect according to AP style to write this: 37 people, were trapped by the snowstorm. Okay, so obviously the general rule would apply here. Normally 37 should be written as a figure, but in this case, 37 is the first word of the sentence. And so the style book says it should be 37 spelled out with a hyphen like this. Most people, and I would agree, kind of hate this. So in order to, still adhere to AP style and avoid this usage, be better to recast the sentence. The snowstorm trapped 37 people. That's a better sentence anyway. It's shorter, avoids passive voice. But the point is it gets that number out of the beginning there. And you can use the figure and you're still following style rules. One exception to this, if the sentence begins with a year, go ahead and use figures. 2020 was the worst year for sports attendance. Okay, that's a number. You're allowed to do this. This is correct AP style. You wouldn't have to spell out 2020 as words or write 2020 or something like that. And finally, ordinal numbers. This is just some terminology and some usage I want to talk about, but a cardinal number is like a number you would use for counting. So 1, 2, 3, 10, 11, 12, those are called cardinal numbers. An ordinal number is numbers that you use to rank things or to put them in order. So the ordinal numbers are first, second, third, 10th, 11th, 12th. Notice the usages there. The general rule still applies, even if you're dealing with ordinals. The only difference is that you have to either, use these words like first instead of one. And when we get into the figures, you include the TH or whatever it would need to be. If I had written 23rd, that would have been 2, 3, RD, okay, for the ordinal numbers. And so here's some examples. Manager was ejected in the 4th inning. 4th is written out as a word because, again, the 0 through 9 principle applies to the ordinal numbers as well. The 10 and above principle applies here. She was named the university's 14th president. So 1,4 TH written as a figure. Okay, that is all I have for this video on AP style rules for numbers. I hope that was helpful.